I don't believe that belief means what most people think when they say belief.
Today I want to look at an excerpt from a conversation that Piers Morgan recently had with Jordan Peterson. And in this clip, they're talking about religion and faith. And there's a lot to unpack. I'll be periodically popping in. I'm going to try and keep myself restrained, but let's take a listen.
You go right to the point of saying you believe in God and that you're a fully paid up God believer, if you like, for want of a better phrase, but you don't quite cross that line. Is that where you are? I mean, if you say you've had a sort of...
Well, no, I don't think so. I think the first thing I would say is that, no, there's a continual insistence in the biblical text that God is outside of understanding, outside of our understanding, right? So whatever God is beyond the categories, even of real and unreal. And that's not my interpretation of the text. I mean, even Moses only gets a glimpse of God's back. And so we have to always remember that we're talking about something that in the final analysis we don't understand. But then I would also say, I don't believe that belief means what most people think when they say belief. For me, religious belief isn't propositional, it's existential. And, we talked about the great adventure, let's say, that Trump and his weird team of X-Men and Avengers are embarking upon. And I would say their faith is manifest in the pattern of their action. And not.
I'm just going to let that sink in for a second. The great adventure that Trump and his team of X-Men and Avengers are embarking on is indicative of their faith. It's manifest in their actions.
What they say. And I think that religious faith in the most fundamental sense is the willingness to hoist your cross joyfully as you trudge uphill.
That's always what I've thought of when I see Donald Trump on television. I think, you must hoist your cross joyfully.
And that's not the same thing as declaiming about what you assume propositionally to be true. And, Christ in the Gospels says, not all those who say, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven. It's like belief is a very complicated issue. And I think the best way that you infer your knowledge about someone's belief is watching how they conduct themselves, not what they...
You said it, Jordan. Let's watch how these folks conduct themselves.
Say, the Pharisees in the gospel text proclaim their belief constantly, but they're the ones who crucify Christ. And that's something to think about.
Yeah, that's something
You got
to think
into
about.
this with Richard Dawkins. It was a fascinating exchange. I want to just play a little mashup from that encounter.
You either believe that the world of truth is unified in the final analysis, or you don't.
The facts that I care about are the facts that are true and have evidence. Did they exist or did they not exist?
Well, I'm speaking allegorically there within the confines of the text.
What makes you think the writers of Genesis were a great writer? I mean, who were they? We know nothing about them.
I think that there's a spirit of literary genius at work across millennia, crafting that story so that it has almost an infinite depth.
The truth of science is the truth that gets us to the moon.
And I don't think it makes any difference.
It doesn't make a difference whether it was divinely inspired or whether it evolved.
Truth is unified. And what that's going to mean eventually is that the world of value and the world of fact coincide in some manner that we don't yet understand.
You analogized the dragon fight to
Well, how many dragons have you overcome in your life?
I'm not interested in dragons. I'm interested in reality. I think...
I'm not interested in dragons. I'm interested in reality.
Dr. Peterson, you're drunk on symbols.
Yes, you mentioned. I've heard that comment.
It was really interesting. I've interviewed Richard Dawkins several times, and I always say to him, it's interesting. I said, because you cannot explain to me, Richard Dawkins, for example, what was there before nothing.
But it's not Richard Dawkins' job to explain what preceded the Big Bang, right? You can't simultaneously, as a believer, say, look, the whole thing about God is a mystery. It's not understandable. Aha. Nothing you say makes sense, Richard Dawkins, because you can't explain every aspect of it. That's That's a double standard, right? Now, Piers Morgan is Catholic. I don't know if he said it so far in the clip, but he probably will. Jordan Peterson, I guess, doesn't declare himself, seems increasingly Christian, maybe agnostic. He's trying to make some sort of sense on it. Richard Dawkins is a card-carrying atheist. And I'm not here to try and convince any listener to believe one way or the other, and I'm not going to talk about my particular belief. What I do admire about Richard Dawkins, and not everything he says, he can be quite, dismissive, and I'm not sure how helpful that is to look down your nose at someone because they don't understand, or especially if they don't agree. He doesn't do that all the time. He wasn't doing that in this clip. But I will say that what he says is typically eminently rational. And I do not think that faith and rationality are diametrically opposed. In fact, I think they enhance each other. And I think if you look to statements of people such as Stephen Hawking, took me a minute to recall the name there, he had enormous faith in mankind's ability to use science and use our God-given minds, if you will, to explore and come to understand and continue to ask questions and to apply reason to the possibly unknowable complexity of this existence in which we live. If that isn't a description of faith, then I don't know what it is. So, I mean, I think a lot of times from people with limited minds, like Piers Morgan, what you hear is it's got to be one or the other. Either you believe or you don't. Either there's a God or there's not. But they will also sometimes say, oh, well, God is unknowable, right? God moves in mysterious ways. So in my thought is like, well, believe whatever you like, but don't abandon thinking. Don't abandon your ability to think. If we have that, then God must have given that to us as well.
What was there before nothing? Because the human brain can't comprehend what that even means, there has to be a superior power to a human being out there somewhere that can make sense of all that.
But that's not necessarily God, and that's not necessarily a creator, and that is not proof that science is meaningless and that religion is true, right? Just because the human mind can't comprehend it doesn't make it true.
That's why I believe in God. I was raised as a Catholic. But the Catholic Herald said of your debate there was no meeting of minds. They were forced to agree their minds were differently constructed. There was no merging of reality. And it seems to me probably if you have me, you and Dawkins in the same room, you've got the three components there. You've got one person, me, who's an absolute unequivocal believer. You've got you that I suspect is nudging that way, but it's not quite there in the way that I am. And you've got Dawkins, who's completely implacably opposed to any sense that there could possibly be anything other than what's staring him in front of his eyes. Would that be?
No, see, I think it's quite the opposite. I think that Richard Dawkins is a measurably more intelligent man than either of these two. And he will admit when you catch him in a logical fallacy. I've seen that many times. I'm not saying that Piers Morgan or Jordan Peterson have never admitted that they are wrong. Jordan Peterson, an intelligent man, I think as I've watched him be on TV more and more, he seems to just sort of get more and more vague and fall more and more in love with these kind of baseless theories and assertions about how things are and sort of half quotes data. Like he seems to be becoming more diffuse. And Piers Morgan's he's a television personality that understands talking to people, and he believes what he believes, and that, if he believes the opinion strong enough, then it must be true, right? There's no methodology to Piers Morgan's rationale.
Well, I'd say a couple of things about that. The first is that even the scientific accounts for materialist reality require one miracle to get going. For example, it's a truism among cosmologists that the laws of time and space, the laws of science, break down at the singularity. And there's no difference between saying that and saying something that we can't explain from within the confines of our materialist understanding emerged at the origin to bring all things into being.
Yes, there is. There's an ocean of difference there. And if you don't see it, that's the problem.
A miracle lurking in there somewhere. And of course,
No, that's exactly it. So Jordan Peterson's foundational belief is that there is a miracle in there, lurking in there somewhere. Now, to me, the problem is terminology, right? What we call a miracle. Is it an old man with a white beard and white robes and a halo, with a plan that we're too small to understand, snapping his fingers and, kind of magically making a bush burn and granting Moses power to part the sea so that, right? Or is it possible that we just haven't been able to find all the answers yet? Science is full of revisions, and now that we have a better processor, we can crunch data and we see, in fact, we've only been seeing the elephant's tail here. There's a much bigger picture. That's the whole point of science. It is an active pursuit of not developing an unbending faith in any single data point as we continuously gather and process more data.
Are also stuck with the problem of the origin of life, which they hand wave about constantly, but have been completely unable to account for. And so my friend Jonathan Pajot, his insistence is that if he's going to accept a miracle, he'll accept the miracle that proclaims that the cosmos itself is founded on sacrifice. And that's a completely different framework of conceptualization that I unpack to a large degree in my book, because you can make a very strong case that perception itself is a sacrificial endeavor. And
so, I mean, this is a perfect example. Jordan Peterson just opens his mouth and very confidently says a bunch of baloney. Like, I've listened to this clip 4 times. I have no idea what he's saying. None of it makes any sense. And he's sort of like, well, it's obvious that representationalism doesn't manifest itself by directly enforcing an existential parabola. None of it makes any sense, man. But these two guys get on here and just fluff each other up about, wow, we figured it out.
Dawkins' metaphysics is very narrowly empirical and very narrowly Enlightenment. And part of the problem with that is that there are also just things that Dawkins doesn't know. And I would say in his favor, and in the favor of our discussion, is that
science doesn't claim to know everything. Religion claims to know everything. Science is using a methodology to try and define answers to things on an ongoing basis. Religion proclaims that the answers are as written by the divine, by people greater and wiser and older than us, and it is not for us to question.
Near the end of that discussion, we did have a meeting of minds, because we started to talk about how the evolution of narrative in the manner that he represented as memes could have a long-term effect on the genetic evolution of humanity. And he got very excited about that. And I was thrilled about that, because one of the reasons I wanted to talk to Dawkins is because I think some of his ideas, especially the idea of meme, has far more significance than he thinks it does.
Right.
So Jordan Peterson is convinced that, he knows what Richard Dawkins thinks better than Richard Dawkins, where I think if you go back and you watch that clip, and I think it's really interesting that Piers Morgan's team put this rock and roll guitar over it, like it's American Ninja Warrior or something like that. Richard Dawkins was eating your lunch, my friend. You said nothing of any import or weight, and he simply stated the truth. Now, I've gone and on and on. I do admire Richard Dawkins. I understand that atheism is not a particularly popular viewpoint, and I'm not even advocating it. But I do think that Richard Dawkins is an atheist because of his adherence to science. Like Stephen Hawking, Richard Dawkins has said, I just see no evidence for it. The evidence that I see for it is it's a human constructed thing. Now, that's his opinion. He can explain it very clearly and very eloquently. You don't have to agree to it. He can't disprove religion any more than Jordan Peterson or Piers Morgan can prove it. So personally, my stance on it is a little more in the middle. I clearly feel that there's an enormous amount of mystery and beauty in the universe, and I personally believe that we should love each other and take care of each other. And the teachings of Jesus Christ, for example, turn the other cheek, love thy neighbor. That sounds like the recipe of a happy life. What's to object in that? I don't necessarily need to sign my name on one contract or the other to feel like I can live a good life and love my neighbor, right? But I want to know what you think in the comments. So I wasn't sure about doing a religion one because, people have very powerful, deep-seated feelings about it. But that's why I'm making these videos. As we move into this crazy time, guys like this think, hey, buckle up. This is going to be great. These great men of faith are going to lead us into a new American paradise. And I think the oligarchs have finally won, and now they're going to rip and run and, going to have to break some eggs to make an omelet, right? And we're the eggs. I hope I'm wrong. I hope to God that I am dead wrong. But I'm reaching out to see what other people are thinking on this, and if it's in the chat, I know some of you are bots, but I know that some of you aren't. Do you agree with Piers Morgan? Do you agree with Jordan Peterson? Do you agree with Richard Dawkins? Or none of the above? Or is it all full of baloney?